Hi, today I'm going to be focusing on the emotions and anxiety section as discussed in Chapter 12 of Woolfolk's book. Something that challenged my previous belief is that anxiety can be a cause and effect of school failure. I had never thought of it as both before, that anxiety builds off of itself to make school even more stressful for some students. A student may become anxious about their performance and then not perform well, and then that anxiety builds because they think they're not going to do well again. Students get anxious, and the effect is that they don't perform well, which causes them to think that they won't perform well, and then the effect is that they don't. It's a cycle where they continue to feel anxious and underperform. Something that made me reconsider my previous belief is that emotions and feelings are not the same thing. I had never thought that they were any different until it was described in this chapter. Woolfolk discusses two people going on a roller coaster that are both stimulated thinking about going on a ride. One feels anticipation and the other panic. Both are experiencing bodily responsive and cognitive assessments which shape their feelings. Woolfolk on page 486 discusses how emotions are the outcome of physiological responses triggered by the brain, combined with interpretations of the situation and other information. So we can take what's happening around us and the feelings we're getting from what we see and what we feel, and then the outcome of that is an emotion. I had previously always thought of feelings and emotions as the same thing, but now I can see how they're different. Something that affirmed my previous belief is that when students feel bored in the class, they may begin a cycle of low achievement, followed by more boredom, followed by low achievement. When students tell me that they're bored with what we're doing, they don't put in as much effort as they do when they're curious about something. For example, in August, we read a nonfiction text about a shark tracker and how scientists find sharks, put trackers on them, and then track them. My students were curious about what that meant, and we found some shark trackers online and looked up some sharks and where they live, especially our friend Peggy, the shark. My friends still almost daily ask if we can look at this shark tracker because they want to know what Peggy's doing, where she is, what she's eating, where she's going, what her patterns look like. They're still curious and excited by something that we learned in August, that we read for 1 week. On the other hand, we've been learning 2-digit by 2-digit multiplication for a few weeks now, and quite a few of my students are bored doing 2-digit by 2-digit multiplication. They get frustrated with it, and then they get bored, and they decide that they're not going to go through all of the steps because there's just too many of them. So in that case, I can see that that boredom is causing low achievement because they're not excited by what they're learning, they're not interested, they're not curious, they're ready to move on and do the next thing in the day. When my students are curious about something, like the sharks, they're more motivated to learn about the subject and investigate more things than even just what we're learning in class. The most important thing that I learned is teaching students a growth mindset and how that will help them better understand their feelings and be able to relabel their feelings. Instead of being anxious for a test, my students should learn that they might be excited for a challenge instead. I tell my students daily that I care more about the work they put in than the grade they give back to me. I believe I can push this idea even further to expand to a growth mindset for my students. I'd love for my students to write down some of their fears and be able to turn those into positives. So for example, I'm nervous about taking a new writing STAR test in 4th grade could change to I'm excited to learn more about writing, or I'm excited about a challenge of taking a 3rd STAR test. Instead of I'm bored doing 2-digit by 2-digit multiplication, it could be I am excited to learn new steps and different ways to solve 2-digit by 2-digit multiplication to make it more intriguing for me. I can take this information and use it in my classroom by helping increase positive feelings about the lessons that I am teaching. Woolfolk discusses many different ways to get students more excited about what they're learning. She discusses that I can help my students feel less bored in class by giving them more choice and control of what they're learning. I try to do this with my students often, even if it's just a really little thing. For example, I tell my students, we're going to need to do reading and writing today. Which do you want to do first? And then my students vote on it. They're going to do both, but when they get to decide which one they're going to do first, they're more invested in both of those topics than if I just say, okay, we're going to write and then we're going to read. When they make that choice, they know, oh, I made this decision. I'm excited that I get to read first and then I get to write afterwards. It makes them more intrigued and excited because they feel like they had a say and they had control in what they were learning. I should also match the challenge to my students' skill level. So I don't want to make something overly challenging for students because sometimes that's so hard that kids get bored because they can't figure out how to do it. Or if it's not challenging enough and it's under their skill level, they're like, I already know how to do this. I don't need to spend time focusing on adding 2-digit numbers. So I should be meeting my students at their skill level to help them be more excited and intrigued by what we're learning. I should also be more enthusiastic about what we're learning because that will help my students be more invested. For example, the last book we read was Bridge to Terabithia. And most days, I'd start out, we'd sit down, we'd talk about what happened yesterday, what's happened so far in the story, and then we just kind of start to read. We're currently reading The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And every day before we read, I get really excited about the topic. I show great enthusiasm. We talk about what characters we like, what characters we don't like. I make predictions about what I think is going to happen next in the story. They make predictions about what they think is going to happen next in the story. And we have this whole big discussion about what we're loving about the book or what made us sad in the book before we even start reading it every day. That enthusiasm that I'm bringing to the topic is making my kids more and more excited every day to be reading. My final thoughts on this topic is that I best want to help my students who are showing anxiety in the classroom, especially because I know I have some students who are already anxious about a STAR test that we're not taking for months and months and months. I think it's important for my students to be able to name what that feeling is, what it feels like inside of them, and how it affects them. Woolfolk discusses how anxiety can interfere with achievement in 3 ways: with preparation, with performance, and with reflection. This means that my students feeling anxious may not properly focus on what they need to be focusing on to succeed. This makes it harder for them to understand information because they don't know what they should be focusing on and then they begin to feel behind. This affects performance because there are blocks in learning because they were struggling when they were trying to prepare. Lastly, this may affect students when reflecting because they feel like a failure and don't feel that they have control over how to attain their goals. Thank you.